Hey guys, Rick back down here at the layout. I got to come up with a good intro phrase. I got something for the back end, but I got to come out with something cool. Like Sparky's got G'day Model Railroaders, and Vinny's got the Cuz, and you got Jerry with Hey My YouTube Friends. So I got to come up with something cool. But anyway, so here we go. We're going to do... I guess this is part 2 or a continuation of my panel board. I actually found something that I left off from the last video, so I want to show you that. And in case you missed my last video, which was about hooking up the NCE Switch 8 to a tortoise and how to program that to actually throw your tortoise, I'll put a card up right there. Click on that. That'll take you to that video. I suggest you watch that one first before you get to this one. You'll still be able to figure it out, but it's easier if you go into sequence. So let me take you down here to the workbench, and I'll explain a little bit of the next segment, which is installing and using the mini panel to create your push button panel for the side of your layout to throw your switches. Alright guys, I wanted to show you something from last week that I left out. NCE makes what they call a button board. It's a very small circuit board compared to your Switch 8. This works, its only function is to work with the Switch 8 so that you can plug in either momentary switches or push button switches to throw your tortoises. So there are 3 pins right here on the side. I believe you're only using 2. There's one labeled a ground and one labeled data, which plugs in over here, either ground or data. And then you can plug push buttons in on these. They're coupled together 2 at a time. So your push button would have 2 leads on it. You would plug an A and a B, A and a B, A and a B. Same over here for these 4. And then you actually have an option over here where you can connect another button board if you were connecting more tortoises. The only difference between this button board and the mini panel, which I'm going to demonstrate, is when you hook up these buttons to your Switch 8, you can push those buttons and it will throw your tortoises. But the communication is only between this board and the Switch 8. That's it. It's a direct connection from these ports to these ports. That's all. When you use a mini panel, the mini panel functions as a cab. You're actually assigning a cab address to your mini panel so that when you program this to throw a command, it's acting automatically as a cab to throw it, which means this is talking to your command station. The command station is telling the Switch 8 to throw the tortoise, and then the tortoise throws. Well, how does that help you? If you're running JMRI, and JMRI is hooked up to your command station, when you're using a mini panel, JMRI, because that communication is there with your command station, it knows what direction your tortoises and your switches and your turnouts are in. If you're using a button board, because the button board is only talking to the Switch 8 and not to your command station, the command station does not know what direction your turnout is in, whether it's closed or thrown. Therefore, it cannot tell JMRI what direction your turnout is in. So there's a little miscommunication there only because this communication is so local, whereas this communication is system-wide. All right, gang, so here we are down at the workbench. I left our Switch 8 and the tortoise up here because we're going to need that in a little bit so I can actually show you how that gets thrown once we get the mini panel set up. So what you need for this project is your ProCab. I'll set that aside for right now because we don't need that just yet. You're going to need either a momentary toggle switch, so something that not that goes on or off, but it's got to just be a clip and back. So a two-way momentary switch, and the mini panel. Where's my mini panel? Oh no. Okay, so my mini panel is actually installed underneath the layout. I went under there before I did this video to try and get a good picture. I'm going to pop a video right here so you can see what it looks like installed underneath my layout. I didn't want to take it down, and you really can't get a good view of it from under there. So I did the next best thing, and I printed one out for you. So I'm going to go off of this page, and I'm going to explain to you the different components here, and tell you exactly what they do and how it all works. So this is basically the panel. It's a little larger than the Switch 8, but not really by much. Maybe half an inch to an inch on each side. It's not that really big. But you'll notice here on the panel there are a bunch of screw terminals. I'll explain what they are in a minute. This chip here in the middle, which is the brains of the operation. And then you'll notice there are 3 telephone jacks. Alright, so these 2 right here will go to your cab bus. So on the NCE network, there are actually, what comes out of the command station is a 6-pin telephone cable. And on your command station, you only get one of those, I believe, depending on the system that you're using. If you're using a power cab, then that's going to go in the back of your... So this is the panel that you would use for your power cab. So everything that you do for the power cab runs through here. So you plug your main controller into the left port on the side, and then you've got 2 other ports, one in the front and one in the back, that you can use to run to other devices. So you would plug this guy in here, and then this would plug into either one of this or this, and then you can daisy chain something else off of this. Like if you've got an NCE AIUL1, you can plug that into here. So you're basically getting 2 ports so you can daisy chain the next device, and you're not ever running out of ports. On my command station, I think I've got 2 ports that come out of the front. One I use to daisy chain all my accessories from, and the other one I use just for my cab bus. So that cable comes out of that jack. It goes into a UTP panel, which you can see this one is different than the power cab. This is the power cab. This is a UTP panel. This one is used if you have a command station. So if you notice, I've got 2 plugs in the front, 2 plugs in the back. So I've got plenty of ports where I can daisy chain either more of these or more components. So let's pretend for a moment that I've got a cable coming out of my command station and it's going into one of these ports. Great, communication's done. Then you've got this standalone port over here. This is the setup port. So the way you actually program this module is by taking your power cab or your Pro Cab and you actually plug it in here with a 6-pin cable. That gets you access to program the chip and give it commands. You only need to have something plugged in there when you're programming one of these inputs. That's it. Otherwise, it stays unplugged. Now, in order to get into that setup, your system has to be off. You have to then plug in and then turn your system on. And I'm going to show you that process because I've got this cable actually plugged in there under my layout. And I'm going to plug this cable into my power cab, into my Pro Cab, sorry. I get those confused all the time. I'm going to flip this around so that you guys can see it. When I turn my system on, it's going to read that it's a Pro Cab system. Tells you the version, and then it immediately tells you it's plugged into an NCE Mini Panel version 1. which is that unit. Now, if I hit enter from there, then I get all the commands that I can use to actually set up and configure that device. We'll get into that in a little bit, but let's go back to explaining this little setup. So I also downloaded the diagram so that you guys can actually see this and read this. This is that same controller panel, and now you've got some explanations. So on this controller, on this mini panel, you actually have 32 different pins, and these go from 1 to 8, 9 to 16, 17 to 24, and then over here it's not really readable, but it goes from 25 to 31, and then right there, that last one, along with these here, are ground. So you could hook up 30 different toggle switches that use 30 different commands just in this one panel. So now I know what you're thinking. Okay, there's 32 pins. Why do we only get 30 devices? Well, this last pin, number 31, well, I've already explained number 32 is a ground. So that's out already. It cannot be programmed. It's connected into the ground circuit, which is how you trip all of these pins. 31 is actually a reset. So if for some reason your device isn't responding, or you just want to clear out the memory and start over, what you do is you would connect 31 to the ground, pin 32, and it will reset the system, blank it out, erase it, and then you could start from scratch. So if you don't include those two, you've got 30 other pins plus 3 grounds that you can start playing with and program. So how does it work? Well, if you notice here, there is a toggle switch, a momentary toggle switch. You can see they only have 2 wires hooked up. I'm going to explain to you how I hooked up one, and then we'll actually show how it actually is being used. But you can hook up toggle switches, you can hook up push button switches, and you can even hook up BD20s. Anything, any device that can be used as a trigger, you can plug into here. So, very simply, you've got one wire that comes out of your, say, toggle switch and goes to a terminal. The other terminal goes to a ground. When you connect that switch, it trips that circuit. That circuit then is calculated in the brain here, in the chip, and then it does what you've programmed it to do. So if it's supposed to throw a turnout, it throws that turnout. Same thing with a BD20. If you hook up one of these block detectors, these BD20s, and you hook it up to the ground, one cable going to the ground and one cable to a pin, when that pin is tripped, so for example, when a train goes into that blocked area, it triggers this cable, sends a signal down this cable, that trips, and then it does what you tell it to do. So for example, if you had a section of track where you knew a turnout was coming up and the train needed to go down that track through that turnout, it could throw that turnout for you. So you could set up automation that way to happen so that if you're going into like a reversing loop, you can have that loop automatically redirect your turnouts. Same thing with a push button. You got 2 wires that come out of a push button. One goes into your ground, one goes into the input in which you're going to program, and every time you push that button, it's going to trigger that switch. Now, I'll go into a little detail a little later when I show you how I'm building my actual panel. There's only one drawback, 2 drawbacks actually, that I can see in this system. You got a whole bunch of trigger points. You've got 30 of them. That's 30 separate switches that you can hook up. But they only gave you 3, if you include that one, 4 ground points. I would imagine trying to fit 30 wires into those 4 ground points is going to get a little congested. What I did is I took a terminal block that I had laying around, and I actually have that screwed up underneath my layout. That terminal block is all jumped over, so all the pins are active. and I have one cable going into the ground. So no matter what pin I'm using, all I have to do is put it in that terminal block and it's grounded. One cable goes to the mini panel, all the other cables go to the terminal block. Another thing you can do, which I'll show you when I build my actual panel, when you're setting up a panel, and you're going to have a bunch of switches on that panel, all of those switches, you can daisy chain the ground. So, for example, if you had a push button, you can send what's going to be your ground pin that's going off here to your left-hand side. You can then daisy chain the next button to leap off of that ground, and then so on and so on and so on for however many pins you have. Because you only need one ground. You don't need 10 wires going to ground. You only need a consistent solder point to each ground and then one cable going back to your mini port, your mini panel, sorry. So, with that being said, I hope that explains what this product does and how it's used and the different devices that you can use it on. Hang on. When I started filming this segment, there was so much information that I wanted to cover and so much stuff that I needed to show you guys about this. By the time I got it done and I got the video into editing, I realized that it went for an hour and 15 minutes. I don't want to have you sit here in one session and go through an hour and 15 minutes of watching this guy. So I've explained the mini panel unit. I explained how it hooks up to your NCE system. I've also explained to you the different components on it and the components that can be used with it. I'm going to cut it there, and my next segment is going to be how to program it and how to make the mini panel act as a cab to talk to the Switch 8 to throw your tortoise. So hang in there with me, guys. I didn't think there was going to be this much to talk about, but apparently my mouth just keeps going. So, Rail Riders, as always, hang with me. Stay safe out there, and let's ride these rails together.